In my last video, I mentioned that certain pharaohs were missing from so-called king lists. A famous example, because it's so well preserved, is the so-called Abydos king list, dedicated to Seti I, which like many others omits pharaohs such as Hatshepsut, Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. It's often put that these kings were deleted from history, but is that really what's going on? Why would a culture that recorded down to the height of the yearly Nile flood be so blasé about tampering with history? To answer both of these questions, we have to consider a third. What purpose did the various king lists actually serve for the ancient Egyptians? Because it's not quite the purpose they've served for us. The term king list is a bit bland. It implies a simple record-keeping function that honestly doesn't do them justice. Think about the difference between a family photo album and a Mexican ofrenda, a shrine where one's late family members are honoured, because this is what the king lists we have were often for. A king paying tribute to his ancestors. Not always literal ancestors, but predecessors as pharaoh, who were taken to be his ancestors / previous incarnations. Remember the scene in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Aang sees the chamber filled with statues of previous avatars? Yeah, that. These king lists, seen in tombs and funerary temples, and at the Temple of Abydos, which was commissioned by Seti I, show tribute being paid to kings from long ago. Imagine you were setting up an ofrenda to honour a deceased family member for the Day of the Dead. The act is welcoming their spirit into your home. Are you going to welcome the spirit of an ancestor that you know was behind some dark stuff best forgotten? If you're Seti I, are you going to honour controversial kings? Now, not all king lists serve this ofrenda-like function. King list, for one thing, is a modern term that describes the use that Egyptologists have put them to. It doesn't necessarily, for example, always describe the same kind of document. A king list might refer to the Abydos temple carving, or to the Turin list, which records the lengths of reigns and is more like a historical record, or to any document that lists multiple kings. But there is an important distinction there. When we see the ancient Egyptians recording history, they don't seem to be deliberately omitting very much. Manetho, consulting an unknown king list, in his Aegyptiaca, refers to the traditionally omitted kings. I don't think we can entertain the thought that Seti I was unaware of the reign of Hatshepsut, even though her name isn't on the list in his temple. Her funerary temple is the gateway to the Valley of Kings. Her statues are everywhere, even if many by Seti's time have been defaced. And the Amarna period only ended 40 years before Seti's reign began. Akhetaten, the city Akhenaten reigned from, probably wasn't populated in a significant way by the time of the 19th dynasty, but the city was still physically there. Seti's father Ramesses I was a priest, and in all likelihood was directly involved in re-establishing the traditional Egyptian pantheon after a brief period of something like monotheism. The tension between king lists and other evidence came to light fairly early on after the hieroglyphs became readable to modern scholars. Champollion, after investigating Hatshepsut's memorial temple at Deir el-Bahari, was particularly frustrated by the contradiction.
If I felt somewhat surprised at seeing here, as elsewhere throughout the temple, the renowned Thutmose III giving place to this Hatshepsut, for whose name we may search the royal lists in vain, still more astonished was I to find upon reading the inscriptions that wherever they referred to this bearded king in the usual dress of the pharaohs, nouns and verbs were in the feminine, as though a queen were in question.
Here, Champollion, though he doesn't realise it yet, is observing that the king lists were not themselves intended as historical records, and that the truth of the reigns of controversial kings was probably as apparent to the ancient Egyptians themselves as to modern scholars. More so, probably, because the everyday people of ancient Egypt didn't look at the king lists. They wouldn't care that Hatshepsut's name had been erased from statues, because for the most part they weren't literate anyway. History, for everyday ancient Egyptians, as for everyday people in most cultures for most of history, was stored not in writing, but in memory and spoken stories. I don't know why they picked on Hatshepsut. I don't think she ever did anything to deserve being damned in the same way Akhenaten and Hizil, or the so-called invaders of the Hyksos. She reigned very successfully, and as far as I know, her only crime was to have been born female. Look, omitting Tutankhamun from your temple walls isn't an attempt to remove the Boy King from history, even if you forbid mention of him in official records, even if you do everything you can to ensure his name is only mentioned in hush whispers, until at last there is nobody alive who lived during his reign. You can't change what was true. The Egyptians knew that. We might call these omissions deletion from history, and yeah, you get to record history however you like, but at the end of the day, you can't gaslight the gods. Thanks for watching. This was only a brief overview of quite a complex topic, so I'd love to hear what you think, especially if you think I'm wrong. Don't forget to honour the like button with a respectful click. The future kings who I hope will remember me in their memorial shrines are my backers at patreon.com/armchairegypt. Huge thanks to them for their support as always. Until next time, my fellow armchair Egyptologists, life, prosperity and health to you all. Thanks for watching. Head over to my channel for more, or click here to see what the YouTube demons think you should watch next. I hope you'll consider subscribing. If you'd like to support and collaborate on the channel with me, go to patreon.com/armchairegypt. You can also join my Discord community, there's an invite link in the description.